Hey everyone, Hazy here, and as you can see, I'm still very much hazy and still very much gray. Guys, you're never gonna believe this, but I've got some groundbreaking information for you that you've got to hear. I'm not dead! Between college, a broken computer, and an undisclosed amount of time spent in a mental institution for reasons I'd rather not get into, I've been gone for a good few months, but now I'm finally back. And can you guess what the first order of business is? Well, I mean, you read the title of the video, right? A few years ago, I decided to review the first free SSX games on PlayStation 2. Were the reviews any good? Nope. Do they at least hold up well? Nope. Do I regret making them and wish to burn those old videos to the ground? Yep. Now luckily, I'm 3 years older and 3 years wiser than I was when I made those first few reviews. So now that I know what I'm doing, for the most part that is, I want to do these free games justice and give them the proper and official hazy gray game review treatment. So, in a rare treat for you guys, I'm going to be re-reviewing the entire SSX trilogy in one single video. So, grab some popcorn, a nice cold beverage, and ease yourself down into your favorite chair. Mainly because we're going to be here for a while, as I rant, rave, and talk about one of my favorite gaming trilogies of all time in the form of SSX on the PlayStation 2. Now before we can talk about the SSX trilogy, we must establish how it was that SSX came to be. You see, back in 1999, the series was brainstormed by a professional skier turned game producer known as Steven. I've honestly not even the slightest bastarding clue as to how you pronounce that last name, so I'm not even going to bother trying. Steven worked at EA Sports at the time. More specifically, he worked in the Big Division, which was known for making more outlandish and arcade-style snowboarding games. Steven wanted to create an arcade-style snowboarding game that paid a loving tribute to the sport of border cross, which is a variation on the typical and traditional style of snowboarding. The game was originally going to be developed for the Sega Dreamcast, but plans changed due to the poor sales of the Dreamcast, which led to EA swapping development over to the PlayStation 2, which resulted in the game becoming a launch title for the system. Despite high praise from Sony regarding early builds of SSX, the higher-ups at EA were very worried that SSX simply wouldn't sell well due to it being a snowboarding game. Despite the pressure, Steven reassured the higher-ups that the game would sell, and lo and behold, he was right. Upon its release, SSX was immediately flooded with universal praise, with the game managing to score a 93 on Metacritic, making it the 19th highest rated game across the entire PS2 library. And reminder, that's a higher score than games that came out later in the PS2's lifespan, such as Final Fantasy X, Ratchet & Clank Up Your Arsenal, and Twisted Metal Black, some of the most memorable and most cherished games on the entire system. Within a single calendar year of its release, SSX would sell over 1.6 million copies, making it one of the best-selling launch titles on the console. Although if I'm being honest, is it really any surprise that the original sold so well? For customers on day one, it was either that, Tekken Tag Tournament, or, I don't know, fucking billiards. So now that we have the brief background of SSX sorted, let's start this retrospective proper with the original SSX. The original SSX set the bar that all the other SSX games needed to exceed if they wanted to be considered worthy sequels. So with that being said, how high is that bar? If this game is anything to go by, the bar is fucking huge. The original SSX is very simple when compared to its successors, but that doesn't mean it lacks depth. The goal of SSX is to race from the top of the map to the bottom in the fastest time possible, but what makes SSX's approach different from most other racing games is that it puts a huge emphasis on exploration, tricks, and large branching levels. In order to pick up speed, you need to perform tricks, which can be done by holding down any combination of the shoulder buttons while you're in the air. Landing tricks will allow you to fill up your boost meter, and by holding the square button, you'll spend that boost and get to go faster for a small amount of time. Since the meter will be constantly decreasing due to its usage, the game's levels are designed to allow you to do as many tricks as possible. This creates a risk versus reward system, where doing more tricks can earn you more boost, while botching a trick will not only cause you to wipe out, but lose a large chunk of unspent boost as well. As for the levels in SSX function very differently from most other racing games, as they ditch the lap system in favor of having one giant level for you to explore, which comes packed full of unique set pieces and shortcuts. The only exception to this rule is Tokyo Megaplex, which is purposely designed to be a lap-based course. The levels complement the gameplay of SSX perfectly, as there are lots of ramps, drops, grind rails, and other methods that allow you to score huge amounts of boost. There are also 8 courses in total, and they aren't your run-of-the-mill snowboard courses at all. You do start out normal, with tracks such as Snowdream and the Elysium Alps, which take place on standard snowboarding courses and skiing slopes, but then you get to tracks like Tokyo Megaplex and Aloha Ice Jam, and the ridiculous factor gets cranked up to 11. You go from boarding down a regular course in the hills of France to racing down an Alaskan iceberg that has been carved out and dragged all the way to Hawaii. And no, do not ask me how they managed to both A, drag an iceberg from Alaska to Hawaii, or B, how the iceberg did not melt on the way there, because honestly, I haven't a fucking clue either way. One thing I really like about the levels in this game is how they all take place in different parts of the world. Snowdream takes place on a standard ski slope in Japan, whereas Mesa Blanca will take place near an abandoned western mineshaft in the American Southwest. With how different and varied the level locations and themes are, the game feels like one big tour across the globe, and it adds to the feeling of progression during the World Circuit mode. Not only are the levels unique, they also have a layer of depth to them. All of these levels sport multiple pathways to take, and have shortcuts hidden in them in the form of these glass panels with the words SSX written on them. Smashing through these panels will often lead you into a shortcut, which is often more dangerous than the main path, but it offers you a much faster route at the cost of putting you farther behind if you navigate it incorrectly. If you can't handle the trek through the shortcuts, taking them is not advised, especially if you're using a character you're not used to playing as. Speaking of the characters, you have only 8 to choose from in SSX, but they all have pretty damn good personalities to boot. You have fan favorites who would return in later games in the series, such as Mac the DJ, Moby the Brit, and Elise the Broad, who are also joined by more forgotten characters such as Jurgen the Russian, Hero the Anime Enthusiast, and then we have my personal favorite, JP, who is just a complete cocky French scumbag, and I love him for that exact reason. All the characters manage to play differently from one another as well, which helps them stand out from one another. You see, every character uses a different type of board which fits their racing style. For example, Mac uses a freestyle board, which is amazing for doing tricks and showing off, but isn't so good in terms of speed and turning. Characters like Moby use a BX board, which is a jack-of-all-trades, master of none, where you get okay speed, turning, and tricks at the cost of not really specializing in any given field. And finally, characters like Hero have Alpine boards, which are fantastic for picking up speed and making sharp turns, at the cost of being about as good as doing tricks as I am at keeping a consistent upload schedule. I'm really sorry about that. Learning how to play to the strengths of your character on SSX is the key to winning. If you try to force your character to adapt to a playstyle they aren't well suited for, you're just going to be putting yourself at an unnecessary disadvantage. As for the music, man, SSX has some bangers. I don't have enough time in this section to go through the music, but man, the soundtrack here is great. It's mainly composed of songs done by John Morgan, Mixmaster Mike, and Rasmus, all of which are slam dunks in my opinion. Not just that, but every single course in the game has its own unique rotation of songs, meaning you'll hear a variety of songs on every level, meaning you don't have to dread about hearing the same song every time you go back to a previous level. Now that we're done gushing over the general mechanics of SSX, let's talk about the main attraction, its story mode, simply known as World Circuit. In World Circuit, you have to try to get the gold medal on all the courses, which will allow you to unlock the rest of the characters, their boards, and even their alternate attires. In order to get the gold medals, you need to complete all the race events and show-off events on every given level while getting first place. Race events will see you attempt to place in the top 3 in order to secure a spot in the final round, with your position in that round determining your medal. Show-off events see you try to score enough points in order to achieve a gold medal. Exclusive to the show-off mode, however, is these giant colored snowflakes that the courses become littered with. If you bump into one of these snowflakes while you're flying through the air, you'll get a point multiplier based on what color you got, with yellow being the smallest at ×2 and red being the biggest at ×5. As you complete the World Circuit mode, you'll unlock all of a character's respective gear, and you will have to play through the game again with another character to unlock their gear, so on and so forth. You also unlock 2 hidden levels for beating the World Circuit mode, so the game does incentivize beating the mode in order to unlock everything. Now, while this game is incredibly fun, it does suffer from a few issues. Not big issues, but issues nonetheless. First of all, the main and only reason to keep playing the game once you beat the World Circuit with your first character is so you can level up the other characters, as if you don't, they'll be stuck at their base stats. So you better enjoy beating your favorite game 8 times in a row, cause all that padding is gonna make you suffocate. Secondly, the SSX engine clearly has a bit of jank happening behind the scenes. I'm not entirely sure what was going on, but there were definitely several instances both on and off camera when I was playing this, where the game just didn't seem to know what it was doing and proceeded to act in a very unorthodox manner, which isn't terrible, mind you. Granted, this was a PS2 launch title, there was bound to be jank, but when this game screws up, you start to notice it more and more. And thirdly, this game, for some godforsaken reason, completely lacks a restart option in the World Circuit mode. Now, I didn't play World Circuit for this video, I just played through the normal races. I did play through the World Circuit in order to unlock the costumes and stuff, but I can tell you this, not being able to restart in the World Circuit mode is bullshit. If you end up having a bad start early on in a race and simply wish to restart, something you can do on the fly in other racing games similar to that of SSX itself, you can't. If you wipe out, your only option is to either A, tough it out and try to catch back up, which on the later levels is really fucking difficult, by the way, or B, you have to go all the way back to the main menu and restart the race that way, which also means if you mess up in the final race, you now have to go all the way back to race 1 of 3. Aside from those, to be fair, few minor gripes, SSX is honestly an amazing first game in the series, and it's very clear why fans and critics absolutely adored this game when it came out. It has buttery smooth gameplay, well thought out and intricate levels, and a progression system that constantly made you feel like you were just getting better at the game. If you want a basic summary of what made SSX such a household name back in the day, I've actually gone out and invited professional SSX speedrunner JuniorSM to share their thoughts and feelings on SSX.
SSX OG is a game that really means a lot to me. Even though it was just the first one in the series, it was the one I really grew up with, played the most since my other discs were pretty broken, and have the most fond childhood memories of. When it came to speedrunning, I just attached to OG instantly, and I think part of that is because of all of the childhood memories I had and just how much it appealed to me nostalgically. I think OG is pretty peak. I still have a lot of fun with it to this day, honestly.
To make a long story short, people in the year 2000 were eating SSX up, and were loving every second of it. In fact, people loved it so much that just over a year later, EA Sports Big would strike again and would release its much more famous younger brother, SSX Tricky. This game started development almost immediately after word got out about the success of the original SSX, and not only was Tricky slated to be released on the PS2, but it was also slated to be released on the GameCube and the Xbox. The game was being worked on under the title of SSX on DVD, and was simply meant to be a remake of the original, with refined level layouts and gameplay improvements. Think of it like Street Fighter 3 evolving from Next Generation to Third Strike. It's basically the same thing, but if you squint, you'll notice the little differences, or you might not notice the little differences. Once enough work was done on the project, EA decided to make SSX on DVD into a full-fledged sequel, which resulted in the game receiving its final name, Tricky. Like the original plan suggested though, Tricky isn't actually a true sequel to the original SSX. It's more of a remake that is stylized as a sequel. The game takes several of the courses and characters from the original and improves upon them in order to deliver a more refined experience. Every single character from the previous game is here, except for Jurgen and Zero, who, fun fact, in the canon of SSX, are missing because they both got injured in the last game, so that's the reason they're not here. But even though they're not here, they are replaced by a wide cast of newcomers, all of which are voiced by pretty goddamn renowned celebrity voice actors. You have Eddie, who is played by David Arquette. You have Luther, who is played by Oliver Platt. Brody, who is played by Billy Zane. And you've got Sia, who's played by Macy Gray. All of the actors who were brought on to voice this cast are absolutely impeccable at their job and make playing as these new characters a blast. One of the things that I think they nailed the most when it came to the acting is the way that the characters speak during races. Whenever the characters nail a massive trick, they explode with excitement. They start to nerd out about the trick they just landed. This often reflected how I felt when playing the game. When a game is able to make you feel that connection between the player character and the player themselves, it really heightens the experience. Out of all of the over-exaggerated caricatures on display here, Simon is undoubtedly my personal favorite. He's voiced by an actual circus performer turned voice actor called Jim Rose, who is absolutely amazing. He nails every single line he's given, and it also helps that Jim Rose is just as mad as Simon, if not like a little bit more so, which is kind of terrifying. And yes, Simon and Psychotic having the exact same couple letters at the start is not a coincidence, trust me. As for the courses in SSX Tricky, the original 8 from SSX make their return in this game, alongside 2 new courses in the form of Garibaldi and Alaska. All the original tracks were not only ported over, but they were completely redesigned from the ground up to be more accessible and open up more opportunities for the player. Tracks like Mercury City and Tokyo Megaplex are almost unrecognizable when compared to their original incarnations, which in my opinion is actually a good thing, mainly because it allows the player to enjoy more variety in the courses without feeling like they're playing the exact same levels again. Courses like Pipe Dream undoubtedly got changed for the better, in my opinion, as I found that the track works much better with its skate park-like design, where you can freely go wherever you want. You don't have to constantly just keep going down until you hit the end of the level. That is something that I felt was very clearly lacking in the original, and when you hop from SSX to SSX Tricky and see how different all the levels are and how they evolved and changed, it was honestly super jarring, because I played SSX Tricky first before I played the original SSX. So when I went back and I saw how the levels originally were, I'll admit, it kind of threw me through a little bit of a loop. But I'll admit, I loved seeing the evolution of some of my all-time favorite levels in a video game. Not only does SSX refine a lot of the good parts of the original, it also continues to innovate in a lot of ways. The game's biggest addition, as well as the main selling point, and something that you've probably come to expect from SSX, even if you've played the newest entries, is the Uber tricks. By fully maxing out your boost meter, you enter Tricky, and if you hold down square while doing a trick, your character will perform an Uber trick, this long cinematic trick that, if landed, fully refills your boost meter and adds 1 letter to the new Tricky meter. And if you land 6 Uber moves in a single race, you spell out the word Tricky and earn unlimited boost for the rest of the race. This Uber move system ups the risk versus reward factor, as yes, you could go for an Uber move and spell out another letter, but if you don't get enough height, you'll crash, burn, and lose the meter entirely, which is another risk-reward system inside the risk versus reward system. That's fucking awesome! Alongside the new courses and characters, SSX Tricky also got a massive upgrade in the form of the soundtrack. The original game already had a bangin' soundtrack, but the one in Tricky is, honest to God, it is up there with some of the all-time greats in terms of charm and personality. The soundtrack was composed by John Morgan and was remixed by Miss Master Mike, but Rasmus was not able to come back to do music for this game, whereas he was able to do music for the original. Despite Rasmus's absence, Morgan and Mike craft a soundtrack that is genuinely mesmerizing. I don't think there is a single song in this game I can't name off the top of my head, mainly because they just all stick out to me so vividly. Songs like Song for Dot, Slave Border, Downtime, and of course, Run DMC's It's Tricky, which is heard throughout the entire game, and yes, as you probably guessed, it's what the game itself is named after. One of my favorite details about the music in Tricky, which I do believe was present in the original, although I don't think I mentioned it in the first section, is when you get really high up in the air during a trick, the music will actually slowly fade out and all the vocals will be removed from the song. Then, once you land back onto the ground, the music will just barge back in at full volume and the lyrics will return.
Oh, my piercings are whistling! Oh, yeah! So
little details like that make the soundtrack of SSX Tricky ultimately one of, if not my all-time favorite soundtrack in gaming. It's arcadey, quirky, funky, energetic, and hypes you up for a trick fuel escapade. On top of all of the new tracks and the new characters, the game uses up the remaining disk space to add a ton of DVD extras, which include developer interviews about the making of Tricky, and even interviews with all of the members of the cast, making the package feel even more complete. It was actually because of seeing these DVD extras that I got my first glimpse into the world of making video games, seeing all of the various names that worked on the game and the jobs they had, all the different snippets of early gameplay showing how far the game had developed over time, and all of the interviews with the voice actors as they recorded their lines for the game showed a young childhood Hazy just how much work actually went into making a video game, and it gave me a newfound respect for Tricky, especially when I went back and I watched these interviews for this video. The idea that regular people just like me decided to band together one day and made a game that entertained me as much as it did, it blew my mind when I was a kid, and it still blows my mind today, and it makes me wonder if maybe I could look and maybe work on a video game on my own someday. With this in mind, I was able to look at my favorite childhood games with a newfound appreciation, games that I would have played all the time on the PS2, games like Ratchet & Clank Up Your Arsenal, Crash Nitro Kart, Sonic Heroes. Tricky introduced me to the art of making a video game and the people behind that process. And so for that, I have to thank this game for showing me something so overlooked, so underappreciated, yet so goddamn cool. If you had to make me describe what this game was to a complete stranger, I would say that SSX Tricky is one of the funkiest, wackiest, most 2000s era games of all time. It has an insane amount of charm, spirit, and most importantly, love poured into every nook, cranny, and space imaginable to create what is, in my eyes, the best sports game ever made. Once SSX Tricky came out and it had time to settle with critics, it was found that they loved this game even more than the first one, and I don't blame them. They praised the level design, character design, personalities of the characters, the arcadey gameplay. They cited SSX Tricky as being just the original, but better. The game also managed to sell great as well, shipping 1.7 million copies, making it an even bigger success than the original and cementing SSX as a franchise that wasn't going anywhere anytime soon, which is good, because we still have one more SSX game to talk about before this trilogy wraps up. Two years after the release of SSX Tricky, EA Sports Big would release the third game in the SSX trilogy, SSX Free. This game would come out on the PS2, GameCube, and Xbox, but unlike Tricky before it, SSX Free boasted an entirely new selection of levels, which all took place on one massive mountain, which the game refers to as Big Mountain, alongside the addition of entirely new characters to the cast, such as Nate, Griff, and Allegra. In my original video on this game, I mentioned how I, quite frankly, hated these new characters and chalked them up as being unmemorable and annoying. Clearly, younger me was smoking something because I love these new characters. Allegra is a tomboy with a kick-ass attitude, kind of reminds me of my own girlfriend, if I'm being honest. I don't know if that's corny or cringy, but that's just what comes to mind. Nate is this rough and tough cowboy who wants to tame Big Mountain all for himself, and Griff is just an excited kid who wants to prove his worth among his older, more experienced peers. I may not like these characters as much as some of the characters from the original SSX and even Tricky, but god, they're still great additions to the roster, and they're not as worthless as I made them out to be. They're really fun characters, and if you like them, good for you. The gameplay of SSX Free is probably the most important part of it, and thankfully, it remains very similar to that of its predecessors, but it manages to add onto the gameplay formula in a way that enhances the gameplay, and in my opinion, makes SSX Free the definitive SSX game in terms of overall gameplay. First of all, the game now has a combo system similar to games such as Tony Hawk. Basically how it works is that the more tricks you perform in a row without bailing, the more points you earn whenever the combo ends. And to encourage the use of this combo system, the game allows you to perform these board manuals while you're on the floor to link together tricks and continue your current combo in situations where there may not be a ramp or rail you can immediately do tricks with. And speaking of rails, you can now just do uber tricks on rails because fuck it, just do board slides on rails, which all add towards your progress in spelling out Super Uber on the new Super Uber meter. The Tricky meter is gone, it's dead, it's buried, it's hidden somewhere in my backyard, and instead we have the Super Uber meter, which functions the exact same as the Tricky meter, except now there's just a few more letters you need to fill in. And considering that SSX Free gives you arguably the most opportunities out of any SSX game to do Uber tricks, yeah, this change is honestly fine by me. And another change to the trick system is that there's now levels to it. There isn't just you can do Ubers and then you can't do Ubers. There are tiers to it. So how it works is that the Super Uber meter is actually now split up into 3 parts. And once you fill up your boost meter, you enter Uber Zone 1, where you can do short, safe Uber tricks that will give you a decent amount of points. Once you spell Uber, you enter Uber Zone 2, where you can now pull off the more death-defying and dangerous Uber tricks that you'd see in Tricky. And once you finally spell out Super Uber, you enter Uber Zone 3, where you receive unlimited boost and can start to race down the track with a frighteningly reckless amount of speed. One key change here is that after a short period, you go back down to Uber Zone 2, and will have to perform 5 more Uber tricks to reach Uber Zone 3, which encourages you to constantly go for big tricks, big points, and to be more risky, which is yet another change that I like, as it reminds the player to perform tricks and engage with this intricate system the game has presented them. Because one issue that I will admit that I do have with Tricky is that once you spell out Tricky, you don't have to worry about doing tricks ever again. You spell out Tricky and you can start roaring down the mountain at top speed, never have to do tricks again. But here, the game is designed to remind you that if you want to use that boost, you gotta earn that boost. You got to, in the game's own words, trick to boost, because tricks equal boost and boost equals speed, and that's exactly what you need to win. As for the levels you'll be performing tricks in, I will say they don't feel as visually unique as the ones in Tricky, but I don't think that is necessarily a bad thing. The reason the courses in Tricky felt so different and unique is due to the fact they were visually and conceptually designed to take place in different parts of the globe. Because of this, none of the levels had to adhere to a specific visual style or color palette, and they were all very different. In SSX Free, all of the levels take place on the same mountain, with the only divider being the peaks they're placed on. While you may think that's a negative, and in the past, and I find that it's a trap that a lot of people who talk about SSX Free fall into, you may think it's a bad thing, but it's not. I'd actually argue it's the polar opposite. In my original video about SSX Free, I talked about how all the levels in that game looked way too familiar, and it made them seem more bland and generic, but in doing so, like many others when they reviewed SSX Free, I missed out on the whole point. The reason why these levels look so similar is because the game is trying to drive home the point that all of these tracks take place on one mountain. You are boarding down this giant open world. This isn't your fictional, oh, this level takes place on a mountain, but you only get to go down like a specific part of the mountain. This is a big mountain, and you get to board down the whole thing, and it all connects into each other. If all of the levels looked entirely different, and they were all from different parts of the world, the illusion would be shattered, and the setting of Big Mountain wouldn't be as unique or as believable. Big Mountain is a living, breathing place, so much so that when you're playing through the story mode, DJ Atomica, who acts as the game's announcer and narrator, he can be heard giving real-time news updates about specific events happening on the mountain. All of this makes Big Mountain probably one of my favorite settings in a video game, and I sincerely apologize that I misunderstood its intentions the first time around. Dear God, what was I thinking in those original reviews? As for the actual levels and how they play, I'm happy to report they play just as well as the rest of the levels we've seen in the series thus far. All of these levels play distinctly from one another, have unique set pieces, and they're all just memorable. They stand out from one another. You have set pieces such as the massive trust fall into the woods on Snow Jam, the Titanic-shaped twin ramps on Ruthless Ridge, and that glorious ice cave on the Throne, all of which help the tracks in the game stand out from one another. Another big change you'll probably notice involving the levels in SSX Free is how they've actually been split up into 4 different types of levels. You have race levels, which are your standard tracks. You have your backcountry levels, which take place in the more dangerous and abandoned parts of the mountain. You have slope style, which are courses entirely dedicated to doing tricks. They're not meant to be raced on. They're entirely meant only to have tricks be performed. And you've got super pipes, which are basically big half pipes designed to allow the player to get in as many spins and dumb flips and rotations as they please. And I like this change, because it allows the developers to get more creative and ambitious with the kinds of levels they want to make. One issue that I found with SSX and SSX Tricky was how you could tell that a lot of the levels were only really designed for racing, with tricks being kind of an afterthought. But now, in SSX Free, it feels like while, yeah, the race levels are designed to be more trick-friendly, you now have levels that are designed to be nothing but trick-friendly. And I love that so much. It allows them, the developers, to evenly focus their attention between making levels dedicated to racing and courses dedicated to scoring tricks, without one half feeling like it's gonna take away priority from the other half. Another massive thing that SSX Free overhauls is how the player actually progresses. You can now customize your character freely by playing through the game's story mode, Conquer the Mountain. You complete challenges and races, and you earn money. And this money can now be spent unlocking customization options for your character, such as hats, backpacks, shoes, and even Uber tricks. You can now fully mix and match pretty much every part of your character in SSX Free to truly make them feel like your own character. And Not only can you use the money to unlock upgrades and customization, but you can also use it to unlock concept art and more behind-the-scenes footage and trailers and even some cheat characters, most of which are actually the missing characters from the original SSX and SSX Tricky who didn't make the main cut in this game. As for Conquer the Mountain itself, it works very similarly to World Circuit in previous games, but unlike the previous games, you're given much more freedom when it comes to what levels you want to complete and in what order you want to complete them in. Due to the mountain being one large level that the player can explore, you'll start at Peak 1, which hosts your beginner-friendly events, and as you progress further into the game, you'll slowly work your way up to Peak 3, which houses the game's most difficult and dangerous challenges. And then, once you reach the top of the mountain, known in-game as the Throne, you can proceed to race all the way from the top of Peak 3, all the way down to Metro City, which lies at the bottom of Peak 1. Being able to slowly race from the top of the mountain to the bottom of the mountain without loading screens is one of the coolest goddamn things I have ever seen in a video game. It is, it's the coup de grace to SSX Free and helps to cement this game as one of the all-time greats in my opinion. But please, don't just take my word for it. Take the word of SSX speedrunner and owner of the official SSX community Discord, which will be linked down in the video description, Rithek.
SSX3 has so many things going for it. Between sound design, music, art style, gameplay, and not to mention DJ Atomica bringing the whole mountain to life. But one of my favorite aspects of the game is that it strikes a perfect balance between strategic planning and improvisation due to its systems, namely boost and combo. Although the game doesn't do you any favors in learning how to play it, and it literally throws you down a mountain when you first start with pretty much no instructions, SSX3 has some of the best controls and it gives you all the tools you need to conquer the mountain. With all of this combined, you get a game that feels great to play moment to moment, and it really allows you to see yourself improve as a player at all skill levels.
Not only do I and Rithek think that SSX Free is one of the all-time greats, but so did the greater gaming landscape at the time. When SSX Free came out, it received even more acclaim from game critics than SSX Tricky did. It scored a 93 on Metacritic, ranking it in the top 20 PS2 games of all time alongside the original SSX, and managed to ship 2.6 million copies in its lifetime, making it the single best-selling game of the entire series up until that point. With free entries under its belt, non-stop universal acclaim, and nothing but love from the fans, the SSX series left its mark not only on the video game industry, but the people involved in the industry in general. And with that being said, let's wrap this video up. So, what was the point of all this? What was the point in looking back at all three of these games, which are now all 2 decades old apiece, and haven't seen a proper re-release as a trilogy? Well, simply put, fuck, I just wanted an excuse to look back at these games and admire them for how fun they were. Now, I'm gonna quickly sidetrack, and what I'm about to say may be seen as initially controversial or contentious, depends on how you view it, but I figured that if no one else is gonna say it, I may as well be one of the first to say it. The main reason I wanted to take another look at the SSX trilogy is because, simply put, and Lord, I'm about to start rambling here, these games remind me of a time when video gaming was simpler, it was more fun, and simply put, it was more creative. A big problem with a lot of modern AAA gaming, for me at least, is that a lot of games nowadays simply don't feel like they were being made to be played for fun. Games nowadays, a lot of them I feel, they feel like they weren't made for fun, they were made for a profit. And, I mean, yeah, that's the end goal, profit, but the game needs to be fun in order for it to generate a profit, and it feels like a lot of companies are kind of ignoring the fun part, and they're trying to jump straight to the profit part, regardless of if that results in the final product even being finished whenever they release it. Now, obviously, this does not apply to all video games. There are a good share of video games that I have played over the years that I've loved. I'm not saying that modern video gaming is terrible. You can still find some great stuff out there. Like recently, I beat Inscription. That game was fucking awesome. I love that game so goddamn much. But the thing is, there is a large chunk of major AAA releases that have fallen under the umbrella of prioritizing money over both the fun factor of the game and also the employees that even work on those games. Like, have you heard the horror stories about what working at some companies, like Activision, is like? Those companies, even to this day, are fucking hellscapes. There have been so many instances of companies just churning out unfinished, half-baked messes, simply so that they can turn a profit at the cost of burning any and all bridges they have with the consumer, aka the person that is giving them their hard-earned money so they can play their game. And I'm genuinely surprised companies like Bethesda, Activision Blizzard, fuck, even modern EA still have supporters willing to flip their wallets at them and play their games. I'm genuinely surprised. Now, I'm going to go on a little bit of a side tangent while I'm on my side tangent here. But back in January of this year, I went out of my way to buy Tekken 8. I didn't have a lot of money at the time, but I saved up enough to buy Tekken 8. Tekken 8 had been a game that I've been excited to play ever since it got announced in 2022. And I loaded it up the same night I bought it. And I can safely say that so far it is one of my personal favorite entries in the franchise. Despite me saying this, I can't lie when I say that the whole time leading up to Tekken 8's release, I was shitting myself. I was a nervous wreck. I was so worried that the whole time leading up to that game's release, that it was going to be this buggy, unpolished mess, and that my €70 investment would have been a complete waste. To me, this mindset did not exist to me when I was younger. When I went and I bought video games on day one, I wouldn't be like, oh, is my money gonna waste? I was more like, oh my god, I got this new video game and it's in my hands. Like, anytime I buy a new game, I always dread initially starting it up because I'm worried that it's gonna be broken, that's gonna be buggy, or that's just gonna be a waste of time. But if there's something that the SSX trilogy reminds me of, it's the good old days. The days where I'd run home from school as fast as I can, throw in an old PS2 game as I played through the night on an old box TV that my dad had. Games like SSX, games like Ratchet & Clank, games like Crash Bandicoot, games like Sonic the Hedgehog. Those games take me back to that time of my life, and that's why I love them so much. Why do you think I mainly cover these old, random, obscure games from my childhood, or games that I didn't appreciate when I was younger, but now I'm taking the time to appreciate them? The PS2 is my favorite game console of all time. Yeah, I own an Xbox Series X. Yeah, I own a PC. But if I ever want to consistently go back and play some good-ass games, I will always boot up my PS2 and just nerd out and play some of my favorite games. The PS2 is my favorite game console of all time. And the games that I just covered, games like that, games that were designed to be fun, replayable, and put fun factor over profits, those kinds of games cement why the PS2, Xbox, and Nintendo GameCube era of gaming is my all-time favorite. The reason why I make these videos and cover these games, regardless of their obscurity or not, is because I know there are people out there who love and appreciate this era of gaming the same way I do. If I can reach out to those people and show them that they're not the only ones who appreciated and grew up playing these games, then I'm doing my job. I'm doing my service on YouTube as a game reviewer. The SSX trilogy is one of my personal favorite gaming trilogies of all time, not just from a nostalgic point of view, but from a critical point of view. It is my genuine belief that SSX, SSX Tricky, and SSX Free are some of the best, most underappreciated, just solid video games of all time. And in the case of SSX Tricky, it's my favorite video game of all time. While EA may not care about making quality games anymore, and while they very clearly don't care about making SSX games anymore, I still do. I'm gonna treasure this trilogy till the day I die. I love these games, and I always will. And I thank you for watching this all the way to the end. Thank you.